The grand ballroom of Althorn House fell silent. Not a gradual hush, but a sudden, sharp cessation of sound, as if a conductor had sliced his baton through the air. 300 heads, adorned with diamonds and family crests, turned as one towards the great oak doors. There, framed by the gilded archway, stood the Duchess. Lady Annalise was not meant to be here. For months she had been a ghost in her own home, a creature of quiet corridors and curtained rooms, her presence at dinner a mere formality, her opinions a muffled echo. Her husband, the Duke, had told society she was delicate, prone to melancholy, in need of rest. Yet the woman who stood there was not delicate. She wore a gown of deep sapphire velvet, a colour that drank the candlelight and gave none of it back. It was utterly devoid of the fashionable lace and frills, its lines severe, elegant, and absolute. Her only jewels were a string of pearls at her throat, cool and luminous against her skin. Her dark hair was coiled simply at the nape of her neck. She looked not like a patient, but like a judge. Her husband, the Duke of Althorn, froze mid-sentence, a glass of champagne raised for a toast. His face, usually a mask of amiable command, slackened with disbelief. Beside him, Annalise's mother, the Dowager Marchioness of Fenwick, let out a small, strangled gasp, her fan fluttering to the floor like a wounded bird. Annalise's brother, Lord Alistair, the new Marquess, went entirely still, his knuckles white where he gripped the back of a damask chair. The social chorus of London held its collective breath. Annalise met no one's gaze but her husband's. She began to walk. Her steps were unhurried on the polished parquet floor, the soft whisper of her velvet skirts the only sound in the cavernous room. She did not approach the Duke directly, but walked to the small table where the ledgers for the estate charities were displayed. In her hand she carried not a reticule, but a slim portfolio of dark leather. She placed it on the table with a soft, definitive thud. From within she produced a sheaf of papers, their edges crisp and damning. She held one up. The Duke's signature was visible even from a distance, a bold, arrogant slash of ink, and beside it another, a near-perfect forgery. A collective sigh rippled through the room. Before this moment could fully break, before the first whisper could find its voice, we must understand how a woman so thoroughly dismissed could bring the whole of aristocratic London to a standstill. To comprehend the silence, we must return to the noise of the beginning. For more stories of quiet strength and public vindication, subscribe to our channel. Let us know in the comments where in the world you are watching from. The story of the Duke and the Footman was a tale whispered in drawing rooms for a season, a romantic fancy that delighted the tongue. The Duke of Althorn, newly ascended to his title and besieged by matchmaking mothers, had devised a plan. He would meet his intended, Lady Annalise, daughter of the late Marquess of Fenwick, on his own terms. He arrived at her family's Mayfair townhouse not in a ducal carriage, but in the plain livery of a junior footman, sent ahead to assist with preparations for a dinner party. He wanted to see the true measure of her character, to observe her when she was not performing for a suitor. He was assigned to polish silver in a small pantry off the main hall, the door left slightly ajar. It was here that he first heard the voices that would shape his life. "He is a duke, Alistair, not a merchant to be haggled with," came the sharper, cultured tones of his future mother-in-law, the Dowager Marchioness. "His estates are vast. The Althorn diamonds alone could settle all our debts and re-roof the country seat." "And Annalise?" A younger male voice, lazy and arrogant, replied. "It was Lord Alistair, her brother. She will do as she is told. She has a head for figures, which is tedious, but it means she understands the necessity. She knows her duty is to this family's name. A pretty face and a quiet disposition, it is all a man like Althorn requires of a wife. He will manage the grand things, she will manage the nursery." The Duke's hand stilled, the chamois cloth frozen over a silver fork. This was precisely the cold calculation he had feared. He was a title, an account book, a solution to their financial decay. He was preparing to leave, his heart hardening with disappointment, when a third voice joined the conversation. Soft but clear. "Mother, must you speak of it so? The Duke is a man, not a vault to be emptied." It was Annalise. He deserves a wife who will honor him, not merely his holdings. The Marchioness scoffed. "Honor comes with security, my dear. Do not trouble your pretty head with sentiment. Your duty is clear." Later that evening, Annalise entered the pantry to fetch a vase. She saw the new footman, his head bent over his work. "You are new here," she said, her voice gentle. "I am Annalise. I hope my family has not been too demanding." She smiled, a small, genuine curve of her lips. She did not look through him, as so many of their station did with servants. She saw a person. In that moment, the Duke of Altorn made a decision. He chose to believe the daughter, not the mother and the brother. He saw in Annalise a quiet goodness, a spirit uncorrupted by her family's avarice. He believed his love and the security of his position could shield her from their influence. He revealed himself a week later, to her family's shock and her own quiet astonishment. He proposed marriage, and she accepted, her eyes shining with a hope that mirrored his own. He was convinced he had made the right choice, that he had found the one true heart in a house of gilded ambition. The first 3 years of their marriage were a period of serene and sunlit calm. Althorn House, once a monument to a bachelor's life, softened under Annalise's touch. She did not redecorate with a lavish hand, but instead brought a sense of order and life to the grand, echoing rooms. Vases were filled with fresh flowers from the gardens, not just hothouse orchids, but simple larkspur and rambling roses. The menus, once ponderous and formal, became lighter, featuring glazed carrots and roast pheasant from the estate, with lemon cakes and sugared strawberries for dessert that reminded the Duke of his own childhood. He would watch her across the dining table, the candlelight catching the simple pearl necklace she favored, and feel a profound sense of rightness. She was not a dazzling society wit, but she possessed a deep, steady competence that he found more compelling. She ran the vast household with an effortless grace, her instructions to the staff delivered in a low, respectful voice. Mrs. Gable, the formidable housekeeper who had served his father for 30 years, declared the new Duchess a marvel of sense and sensibility. Annalise's quiet intelligence was most apparent in the estate office. The Duke, initially indulgent, had shown her the household ledgers. He expected her to glance at them and hand them off to his steward. Instead, she sat for hours, her brow furrowed in concentration, tracing lines of expenditure, making neat notes in the margins. Within a month, she had identified several redundancies and proposed a new system for purchasing supplies that saved the estate nearly £800 in the first year. The Duke was impressed, even proud. "You have a mind for it, my dear," he said, kissing her temple. "A rare gift in a woman." He meant it as a compliment, blind to the casual condescension in his words. Their happiness was sealed with the birth of their son and heir, Arthur. He was a bright, inquisitive child, and Annalise was a devoted mother. The Duke would often come home to find her on the floor of the nursery, building block towers with their son, her laughter echoing in the sun-filled room. In those moments, his heart ached with love for her. He had been right. He had rescued the gentle dove from the nest of hawks. Her family, the Fenwicks, were frequent visitors, their initial awe of the ducal splendor hardening into a comfortable entitlement. The Duke, feeling magnanimous, settled their most pressing debts, a gesture he saw as freeing his wife from her past obligations. He did not see the predatory gleam in his mother-in-law's eyes, nor the resentful ambition in his brother-in-law's. He saw only his wife's gratitude, and it was enough. The memory of the conversation he had overheard in the pantry faded, becoming a quaint anecdote in the story of their courtship, a shadow dismissed by the bright sunlight of their present happiness. He believed he had built a fortress of love and wealth around his wife, a place where the cynicism of her family could never touch them. He did not realize he had simply given them a larger, more valuable prize to covet, and in his loving blindness he had left the gates wide open. The erosion began so gradually it was almost imperceptible, like the slow wearing of stone by water. It started with her family's visits, which grew longer and more frequent. The Dowager Marchioness and Lord Alistair became fixtures at Althorn House, their presence a constant, subtle pressure. The first public slight occurred at a dinner party for a visiting dignitary. Annalise was explaining a detail about the estate's tenant farming programme, a subject she knew intimately. Lord Alistair interrupted with a lazy smile. "My dear sister, do not bore our guests with crop rotation. Your talents lie in more decorative arts, I am sure." The Duke, instead of defending her, simply gave a soft chuckle and changed the subject. Annalise felt a flush of heat rise to her cheeks, but she said nothing, merely taking a sip of water, her hand perfectly steady. A week later, the Duke was in his study with his brother-in-law, discussing a potential investment in a new shipping venture Alistair was promoting. Annalise entered to bring them tea. "I read about that company in the Times," she said quietly. "Their chairman has a poor reputation. There are whispers of insolvency." Alistair waved a dismissive hand. "Annalise, you read the society pages. Leave the business of the world to men." The Duke looked at his wife, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. "She means well, Alistair. But yes, my dear, this is hardly your concern." He patted her hand as if she were a child who had wandered into a meeting of adults. She was being told, gently but firmly, that her intelligence was an inconvenience. The sphere of her competence was shrinking. Once praised for her management of the household accounts, she was now subtly excluded from larger financial discussions. When she questioned a large withdrawal of £5,000 made out to her brother's name, the Duke became defensive. "It is a loan, Annalise, a private matter. Do not trouble yourself with it." The phrase, "do not trouble yourself," became a constant refrain, a silken cord tightening around her. She was instructed to rest more, to focus on the nursery and her social duties. Her mother would often find her in the estate office and sigh dramatically. "My dearest, you will give yourself a headache with all these numbers. A woman's constitution is not made for such stress. Go and lie down. I will speak to the steward." The Duke, seeing his wife grow quieter and more reserved, mistook her thoughtful pain for the melancholy her mother diagnosed. He began to believe the narrative they spun, that his brilliant, capable wife was, in fact, a fragile creature overwhelmed by the scale of her duties. Their son Arthur, in his childish innocence, gave voice to the growing chill. "Mother," he asked one morning at breakfast, "why does father no longer kiss you when he comes home?" Annalise's hand paused while pouring milk into his cup. The Duke, seated behind his newspaper, did not answer. "Father is very busy, my love," she said, her voice even. She endured it all with a profound, unbreachable composure. She did not argue or weep. She did not plead for his attention or protest her brother's condescension. She simply watched, and she listened, her quiet presence a constant, unsettling counterpoint to their casual cruelty. She was being systematically diminished, erased from the partnership she thought she had built, and her own husband was the chief architect of her isolation, guided by the whispering voices of the very people he had once vowed to protect her from. The full dimension of the scheme was revealed to her, not in a single dramatic moment, but in a series of quiet, chilling discoveries. Relegated to managing only the household ledgers, she began to notice a pattern of escalating expenses, small at first, but growing with alarming regularity. Invoices from London merchants for wine, silks, and furniture she had never ordered. Bills from tailors and jewellers for items that never appeared in Althorn House. Each one was countersigned by her brother, Lord Alistair, with a note indicating it was for the Fenwick account, to be settled by the Duke. When she cross-referenced them with the Duke's private withdrawal ledger, which he now kept locked in his desk, she found corresponding payments. He was funding her family's profligate lifestyle, bleeding his own estate dry under the guise of familial support. The true betrayal, however, was not merely the squandering of money. One rainy Tuesday, while searching for a misplaced book in the library, she found a side door to the Duke's study had been left ajar. She heard her mother's voice, sharp and conspiratorial. "He is convinced she is unwell." It was a masterstroke, Alistair. The more she retreats, the more he relies on us. He sees her silence as weakness, not observation. "And the investments?" her brother asked. "The shipping company?" "He signed the papers yesterday," her mother purred. "Another £20,000. He believes he is investing in the future of British trade. He has no idea the company is a shell, and the funds are being diverted to pay our gambling debts from last season." Annalise stood frozen in the corridor, a copy of Wordsworth trembling in her hand. It was not just greed. It was a calculated campaign of fraud and deception, built upon the foundation of her own character assassination. They had poisoned her husband's mind against her, painting her as a fragile hysteric, to gain unfettered access to his fortune. The final piece fell into place a week later. Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper, came to her with a worried expression. She had found a page from a letter, dropped in a hallway, written in Lord Alistair's hand. It was a practice sheet, filled with attempts to replicate the Duke's signature over and over until it was nearly perfect. The forgeries on the estate documents were her brother's work. She realized then the full, horrifying scope of their ambition. They were not just siphoning money, they were creating a web of fraudulent transactions, documents signed with a forged ducal signature that could ruin the Althorn name and fortune entirely. And her husband, the man who had once admired her mind, was so blinded by their influence, so convinced of her incompetence, that he could not see the precipice upon which he stood. She looked at her reflection in the dark glass of a window, seeing the pale, quiet woman they had tried to create. But beneath the surface, the methodical, intelligent mind the Duke had once praised was whirring, cold and clear. They had made a fatal error. They had mistaken her silence for surrender. They had dismissed her competence, and in doing so had given her the very tools she would need to dismantle them. She was the only one who truly understood the numbers, and the numbers, she knew, would not lie. Annalise began to build her case in the dead of night. After the great house fell silent, after her husband had retired to his separate bedroom, a courtesy, he'd said, to allow her undisturbed rest, she would slip out of her room, clad in a simple dark dressing gown. She carried a single shielded candle to the estate office. The room that had once been a symbol of her partnership with her husband now became her secret war room. With painstaking care, she began her work. Using the key she had always kept, she opened the Duke's desk. Her hands were steady as she lifted the heavy ledgers. She did not steal them. Instead, she began the laborious process of copying them, page by page, onto fresh paper she had purchased herself from a stationer in the village. Her calligraphy was as neat and precise as a clerk's. For hours she would write, documenting every fraudulent withdrawal, every inflated invoice, every forged signature. She noted the dates, the amounts, the recipients. It was a cold, hard catechism of betrayal. Beside each of Alistair's forgeries, she placed a copy of a legitimate document bearing the Duke's true signature. The subtle differences in pressure and angle now screamingly obvious to her trained eye. Her domestic competence became her weapon. She interviewed the head groom about deliveries of wine that never arrived at the cellars. She spoke with the cook about orders of exotic foods that never graced their table. She questioned the maids about bolts of silk that were never sewn into gowns for the Duchess. Each servant, loyal to her because of the kindness she had always shown them, provided another piece of the puzzle. They gave their testimony willingly, their words recorded in sworn statements that Annalise drafted herself and had them sign, their plain, honest signatures a stark contrast to her brother's elegant deceptions. She sold a small diamond brooch her grandmother had left her, a piece her husband had never seen, and used the 50 sovereigns to retain a quiet, brutally efficient solicitor from Lincoln's Inn Fields. She met with him twice, in secret, in the back room of a London bookshop, presenting him with her meticulously copied ledgers and the servants' statements. He was a man who cared for facts, not titles, and he saw immediately the strength of her case. He advised her on which documents were most critical and how to present them for maximum legal and social impact. All the while, her husband and her family remained utterly oblivious. The Duke saw only a wife who was more withdrawn than ever. "You look tired, my dear," he would say at dinner, his voice laced with a weary sort of pity. "Perhaps a trip to the sea would do you good." Her brother, emboldened by his success, grew more arrogant. "The Duchess seems quite out of sorts lately," he remarked to the Duke over port. "It is a blessing you have us to lean on." They saw a pale, defeated woman. They never saw the flicker of iron in her eyes as she looked up from her plate. They did not see the ink stains on her fingers, washed away each morning. They did not hear the rustle of papers as she placed them into a locked leather portfolio, a fortress of facts built in the shadows while they laughed in the light. They had successfully confined her to the domestic sphere, never imagining she could turn that gilded cage into an arsenal. The evening of the Althorn Grand Ball arrived, a glittering affair intended to celebrate the success of the Duke's new investments. For Annalise, it was the culmination of 3 months of clandestine work. Her preparation for the evening was a ritual of quiet resolve. She dismissed her maid, preferring to dress alone. From her wardrobe, she selected the gown of sapphire velvet. It was not new, she had commissioned it years ago, but had never worn it. Its severe simplicity was a statement. It was the armor of a woman who had no need for ornamentation, whose substance was her shield. She did not weave diamonds into her hair. She did not fasten bracelets upon her wrists. She wore only the pearls, their cool weight a familiar comfort against her skin. When she was ready, she went to the nursery. Arthur was already asleep, his small hand curled on the pillow, his breathing soft and even. She stood over his cot for a long moment, the candlelight softening the determined lines of her face. She leaned down and kissed his forehead, a silent promise of protection, of a future built on truth, not lies. She had given 2 sealed envelopes to Mrs. Gable earlier that day. The first contained a full copy of all her evidence, to be delivered to her solicitor should anything happen to her. The second contained instructions for the housekeeper to take Arthur to a trusted cousin's estate in the country at dawn, removing him from the inevitable fallout. "Your Grace," the housekeeper had whispered, her eyes filled with a fierce loyalty. "Godspeed." Meanwhile, in another wing of the house, the Duke dressed with an air of self-satisfaction. He saw the ball as a triumph, a demonstration of his acumen and prosperity. He stopped by Annalise's chambers, finding her standing before the long mirror. "Ah, there you are," he said, his tone patronizingly cheerful. "That is a rather somber choice of gown, is it not? No matter. Do try to enjoy yourself this evening, my dear, for my sake." He did not notice the portfolio resting on her dressing table. He did not see the unwavering clarity in her eyes. He saw only what he expected to see, his sad, beautiful, broken wife, Downstairs, her mother and brother arrived, preening in the glow of their success. The Dowager Marchioness was draped in new diamonds, paid for with Althorn money. Lord Alistair was expansive, accepting compliments on his financial genius. They moved through the glittering crowd, the architects of a grand illusion, entirely confident in their victory, never once glancing towards the shadows from which their reckoning was about to emerge. They believed they had taken everything from her. They were wrong. She had one thing left they could never touch: the truth. And she was about to give it back to them in front of the whole world. The orchestra was playing a waltz as Annalise entered, but the music faltered and died as she began her long walk across the ballroom floor. The silence that had greeted her at the door deepened, becoming a heavy, watchful presence. She walked past the Duke, past her stunned mother and brother, and stopped at the small table displaying the charity ledgers. The leather portfolio was in her hand. She placed it on the table and opened the clasp. The click echoed in the unnatural quiet. "Your Grace," she said, her voice not loud, but carrying with perfect clarity to every corner of the room. She was addressing her husband. "You were about to offer a toast to your recent good fortune. I believe your guests, and indeed you, may be under a misapprehension as to the source of that fortune." The Duke stared at her, his face a mask of confusion and anger. "Annalise, what is the meaning of this? You are making a scene." "I am making a record," she corrected him softly. From the portfolio she drew the first set of documents, the household accounts from the past year. "These," she announced, "are the official household ledgers, detailing expenditures for Althorn House." Then she produced a second, thicker stack of papers. "And these are the invoices submitted by my brother, Lord Alistair, and paid by you for goods and services never rendered to this estate, for wine that was never delivered, for fabrics never purchased, for wages paid to ghost servants, a total of £14,220. A collective gasp went through the room. Lord Alistair took a step forward. "This is preposterous! The woman is hysterical!" Annalise did not look at him. She produced another document. "This," she said, holding it aloft, "is the agreement for your investment of £20,000 in the Fenwick Shipping Company. An enterprise, my solicitor has confirmed, that possesses no ships, no offices, and no assets. It is a shell, designed for the sole purpose of fraud." The Duke's face had gone pale, the colour draining from it as if leached by a fever. His eyes were fixed on the papers, on the signature at the bottom. "I signed that," he whispered, more to himself than to anyone. "No, Your Grace," Annalise said, her voice gentle but devastating. "You did not." She laid a second piece of paper beside the first, a simple household order for stationery, bearing his authentic signature. And then a third, the practice sheet, filled with her brother's attempts at forgery. "My brother has become a skilled artist, but his craft has a flaw. He applies pressure on the downstroke. You, my husband, do not." Lord Alistair lunged, a desperate, guttural cry tearing from his throat, but two footmen, loyal to the Duchess, stepped forward and seized his arms. The Dowager Marchioness swayed, clutching her chest, and collapsed in a heap of rustling silk and worthless diamonds. The entire room was frozen, a tableau of shock and ruin. Annalise looked at her husband then, at the shattered man who had allowed this to happen, who had believed the lies because it was easier than believing in his own wife. He looked at her, his eyes pleading, filled with a dawning, horrifying understanding of his own blindness. She gave him no anger, no triumph. She gave him only the truth, delivered in one devastating, quiet line. "The great tragedy, Your Grace, is not that they were so deceptive, but that you were so easily deceived." She turned without another word, and walked out of the ballroom, her back straight, the whisper of her velvet gown the only sound that followed her. She did not look back. She did not need to. The truth now occupied the silence she had left behind. The consequences were swift and absolute. The Althorn Grand Ball became the single most scandalous event of the decade, spoken of in hushed, awe-filled tones in every drawing-room from Mayfair to Bath. Before the sun rose, Lord Alistair was in the custody of Bow Street runners, the evidence Annalise had provided to her solicitor having been immediately passed to the authorities. The Dowager Marchioness, revived with smelling salts, was not arrested, but she suffered a far worse fate in her world: social obliteration. Her invitations ceased overnight. When she attempted to call on a friend, the butler informed her that her ladyship was not at home, a mortal blow from which her reputation would never recover. Stripped of the Althorn funds and facing a mountain of debt, she and her son were utterly ruined. The Fenwick name became a synonym for treachery and disgrace. For the Duke, the aftermath was a private hell. He locked himself in his study for 3 days, refusing food, speaking to no one. The man who emerged was altered, the amiable arrogance gone, replaced by a hollow, haunted look. He was forced to confront the depth of his failure, not just as a steward of his fortune, but as a husband and a man. He had betrayed the one person who had been loyal to him, and he had done so out of pride and a foolish susceptibility to flattery. He had allowed his wife to be wounded in his own house, under his own roof. The shame was a physical weight, bowing his shoulders. Annalise, meanwhile, moved with quiet purpose. She did not retreat to the country or take to her bed. She took her seat in the estate office. The steward, who had been unwittingly complicit, offered his resignation. She refused it. "You will remain, Mr. Davies," she said, her voice calm. "But you will report to me. We have a great deal of work to do." Together they began the arduous task of untangling the financial chaos the Fenwicks had created. She worked with a relentless, methodical energy, restoring order, cutting waste, and securing the foundations of the Althorn estate. She did not seek her husband's counsel, nor did he offer it. A chasm of silence and shame lay between them. He would watch her from a distance, seeing the true strength and intelligence he had so casually dismissed. He began the slow, painful process of earning his way back. It started with a simple gesture. He brought her a cup of tea in the office late one night. She accepted it without a word. The next week, he sat in a chair in the corner of the office while she worked, saying nothing, simply being present. He was no longer the Duke commanding his domain. He was a penitent, waiting for a sign. The community of the estate, from the tenants to the servants, saw the shift. Their respect for the Duchess, already high, solidified into something akin to reverence. They saw who had saved them. The power in Althorn House had found its true and rightful centre, not through title or inheritance, but through character and competence. 5 years later, the gardens at Althorn House were more beautiful than ever. Annalise stood on the west terrace, watching her son Arthur, now a sturdy boy of 8, chase a butterfly across the rolling lawn. The scent of roses and freshly cut grass hung in the warm afternoon air. The estate was not just solvent, it was flourishing. Under her meticulous management, the farms were more productive, the tenants more prosperous, and the future more secure than it had ever been. Her husband came to stand beside her, placing a light shawl over her shoulders. The silence between them now was not one of distance, but of deep, comfortable understanding. He was a changed man, quieter, more thoughtful, his love for her now grounded in a profound and humbling respect. He never made a significant decision without consulting her. Their marriage had been broken down to its foundations and rebuilt, stone by painful stone, into a true partnership. "A carriage is approaching," he said, his eyes on the long, oak-lined drive. It was not a grand carriage, but a shabby, hired trap, pulled by a single, tired-looking horse. As it drew closer, they could see the passenger. It was her brother, Alistair. Released from prison a year prior, he looked thin and worn, his fine clothes replaced by a threadbare coat. He stepped down from the carriage, his movements hesitant, and stood before the great house, a man dwarfed by the life he had thrown away. A footman approached the Duke and Duchess. "Lord Fenwick is asking to see you, Your Grace." Annalise looked at her brother, a figure of ruin against the backdrop of the prosperity she had rebuilt. There was no triumph in her heart, only a quiet sadness for the waste of it all. "Send him to the kitchens," she said softly. "Tell cook to give him a hot meal. He may eat with the staff." The Duke looked at her, his eyes filled with love. He understood. It was not a punishment, but a final, clear statement of fact. Alistair was no longer their peer. He was a supplicant, a stranger to be offered charity, not a brother to be welcomed into the drawing-room. He had forfeited that right forever. As Alistair was led away towards the servants' entrance, Annalise turned back to watch her son. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden light over the land she had protected. For titles may open gates, but once trust is broken, even a marquis may stand outside forever. Thank you for joining us for this story of quiet resilience. Do you think Annalise was right to offer her brother charity but not forgiveness? Let us know your thoughts in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. We look forward to sharing our next story with you. For while pride may wear diamonds, character endures forever.